This program has been paid for by the sponsor and does not reflect the views of PCN.
Welcome to this edition of PHRC Speaks, Fair Housing in the 21st Century. I'm your host, Adrian Garcia, Director of Enforcement for the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. Today on PHRC Speaks, we will talk about fair housing and modern technology. Specifically, we will be discussing artificial intelligence and algorithms and how they impact access to housing opportunity. According to Brookings, algorithm-driven discrimination is a concern in many fields, in particular so in housing, a domain with extensive historical and continuing patterns of discrimination. Believe it or not, algorithms play an active role in home financing, leasing, marketing, sales, and zoning. In fact, our guest today calls AI the new civil rights frontier. Dr. Michael Akinwumi is Chief Responsible AI Officer at the National Fair Housing Alliance, where he is tasked with critical responsibilities including the development and implementation of responsible AI policies and guidelines that prioritize fairness, privacy, security, explainability, reliability, and non-algorithmic solutions. He provides strategic oversight and leadership, collaborating with senior management to advocate for ethical AI practices in housing and lending, and assesses potential risk associated with AI use in housing and lending. Stakeholder engagement and education are part of his portfolio, involving interactions with both internal and external parties to gather input, educate employees, and ensure adherence to responsible AI principles. Previously, he led a governance engineering recommender systems and machine learning solutions for various sectors, such as fintech, banking, and insurance. He holds a PhD in applied mathematics from the University of Alberta and has multiple certifications and honors in data analysis and mathematical modeling. Whew, that's a mouthful, and I'm so happy that he was able to take time from his busy schedule. Welcome to PHRC Speaks, Dr. Akinwumi. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Adrian, and also thanks to the PHRC Speaks team for hosting me.
Excellent. So, I always ask the guests that appear on our program because I want people to make a connection with them when it comes to this field. This is not a field that you just wake up one day and decide, I'm going to do social justice work. So tell us about your social justice journey and how you ended up as Chief of Responsible AI for NAFA.
Thank you so much for that question. Talking about my social justice journey, that is going to take me down the memory lane, which I'm happy to do on this call. But before I do that, I would like to tell you briefly about NAFA, the National Fair Housing Alliance, because I like the audience to know that NAFA is the country's only civil rights organization solely dedicated to eliminating all forms of housing and lending discrimination and ensuring equal opportunities for all. So for over 3 decades, NAFA has worked to advance fair housing principles and practices through education, advocacy, enforcement activities, and also our responsible AI efforts. So with more than 200 members, NAFA serves as a national voice on fair housing issues, providing resources, research, and policy development to foster equal housing opportunities for all individuals. So now that I've let you in on what we do here at the National Fair Housing Alliance, so I'll be happy to tell you my social justice journey. So my journey towards social justice began with personal experiences in my childhood in Nigeria. So I grew up in Nigeria, which is a country in West Africa. So, during my childhood, I noticed differences in how my sisters and I were treated by the society that I grew up in. So this early awareness of inequality in treatment led me to become an active voice for fairness during my high school years, where I often discuss societal issues and the dynamics of teacher-student relationships. So my interest in math and computing science further shaped my path. And during my undergraduate studies in mathematical science, I remember there was no female in my class. So we're all guys, right? And one of the stereotypes that I had to also defend then was, the stereotype that women are less capable in these fields, in mathematical fields. And that stereotype was actually spreading like fire. So I strongly opposed that notion. And, it contributed to my dedication to social justice. And, one of the things I like to say that I'm very proud of now is that at least I can say that my wife is very good with numbers, better than I am. So at least that demystifies the notion that women are not good with numbers or math. So my commitment to using my skills for the greater good, particularly for those who are underprivileged, continue to grow even after my undergraduate studies. So my career took me through various roles after my PhD, from developing algorithms for insurance pricing to creating product recommendation systems for a retail bank. So these experiences opened my eyes to the potential harms of irresponsible algorithms, particularly in limiting access to financial opportunities for certain groups. So I had a first-hand experience about how algorithmic solutions can impact people. So as a result of that, I began participating in public events to raise awareness about algorithmic bias and discrimination. And this was happening in Canada. So, I would say as God would have it, because my effort caught the attention of the National Fair Housing Alliance, in particular, President and CEO Lisa Wright, because I remember one of the events I attended then got recorded on YouTube, uploaded to LinkedIn, and one thing led to the other. I was invited to a panel that they had then. So I was in Canada, but this was in the US, right? But I'm grateful looking back that I actually accepted that opportunity. Because of my experiences, I've been looking for the right organization that I can actually pour my passion into. So when I got invited, so that opportunity actually marked a turning point in my career. So eventually leading to my current role as Chief Responsible AI Officer, where I focus on ensuring technology serves as a tool for equity and fairness, especially in housing access. Awesome. So that's my journey in brief.
That's a good journey, and it all started with you just kind of looking at your societal norms and deciding, right, the way people are treated differently doesn't jive with me, and it usually starts. That's why it's a journey. It starts with self, and what do you want to see in the world? And I congratulate you for that decision and your position with NAFA. So before we get into any other details, tell us about algorithms and how they play a role in housing-related transactions, right? First, I guess people need to know what algorithms are.
Yeah, no, that's right. So, so when we talk about housing, if you look at what housing is 10 years ago, 20 years ago, right? So it's fair to say housing today has embraced technology, creating a new field that is known as PropTech. So PropTech is a blend of property and technology. So the shift means many housing decisions now rely on digital systems that are powered by data, so either completely or in part. So this includes important processes like deciding who gets a mortgage, setting mortgage rates, screening tenants, processing development permits, marketing real estate, and appraising homes, right? So, one may start thinking, if you start hearing about or reading news about algorithmic harms, right, that why use algorithms at all in housing? So, I mean, depending on who you listen to, one of the usual reasons, at least from the institutions, is they're using algorithms mainly for efficiency and to try to be fair or objective, right? But as we do that, it's crucial, it's very important to recognize that not all algorithms are created responsibly, and this can lead to serious problems. In fact, a clear example of the harm that faulty algorithms can cause is seen in the housing advertisement discrimination case of the National Fair Housing Alliance against Facebook. I'm happy to tell you that it was actually the National Fair Housing Alliance versus Facebook case that led NAFA to decide to start a tech equity initiative program that we now grew into Responsible AI. And another instance reported by NBC News in 2021 related to algorithmic discrimination in housing involved someone named Marco Antonio Fernandez from Maryland, who sued a tenant screening company because their tenant screening report had errors that wrongly prevented him from renting an apartment. So while algorithms can bring benefits to housing transactions, it is very important that we remain vigilant to ensure they are developed and used responsibly to avoid unfair outcomes. Now, your other question about what is an algorithm, right? Again, because when it comes to addressing algorithmic harms, I see it as a multidisciplinary effort or approach. So if we want to talk about algorithm, for example, you can see it like a complex concept, but it can be understood in different ways depending on the context, right? To a child, it might be like a trick or a method they use to get what they want from their parents, like convincing mom to buy a toy or dad to make pizza, right? So if you think of my 3 years old, right? So he knows how to get something from me. I don't know if he has learned the pattern, but there's a way he gets to me. That if he asks me and he repeats that multiple times, I have no option than to actually provide that, right? So it's possible that he has observed some patterns, right? Now, at the same time, if you speak to a policy, like from a policy perspective, an algorithm can be seen as a set of instructions, often written in a complex language. And the complex language is math, right? A symbolic representation of thoughts. And, the complex language that can be hard for lawmakers or regulators to understand. This complexity can make it challenging to create effective policies around technology. Now, for someone like me with a background in math, so an algorithm is like a precise set of rules used to solve a problem or find something specific in a large, confusing set of data. One of the analogies I like to give is if you ask me to find my way around my kitchen, right, that maybe you have a recipe and you want me to prepare something for you, you better give me the right recipe because I'm the type that actually follow the recipe to the letters. So I'm following some algorithm to prepare or create an outcome that I'm hoping Adrian and Tim will eventually eat in my kitchen. So you think about it that way. So there needs to be a clearly defined objective or outcome, and then instructions to follow. Now, the instructions may be something written in plain language, but it could be something, in the case of computer, you need to write it in a computer language, which we call our code. So my point is understanding and regulating algorithms require collaboration across all levels of society. Okay. From young children to senior citizens, we need to think about, what algorithms means to them, what impact these algorithms can take. And, with advancements in technology, in fact, like generative AI, which can even use data from people who are no longer with us. So it is more important than ever to have clear, responsible, and enforceable rules about how algorithms can be used and what data they can be applied to.
No, I like the explanation. I also like the way you explain that it's a set of precise rules. which I'm setting up for a question that's not in what we discussed, but it's got to be asked. Is it safe to assume that when we're looking at the housing landscape and the disparate treatment and wealth gaps, when we are considering algorithms, do you believe that we are using a set of principles that are dated?
Yeah, no, the principles are not only dated, but the principles are even shaped or formed by the effects, the lingering effect or the legacy effect of past discriminatory policies.
Exactly.
Right? So, when we think about algorithm, like I always like to say, and this is one of the things I'm really, really passionate about, I believe that algorithm shouldn't be too complex for anybody to even ask questions around, right? So when we're talking about algorithms or the principles, the policies being updated, outdated, right? So there are a lot of examples, especially in housing, where many of these discriminatory effects are still continuing to shape, right, the algorithms that we're using in housing. And why do I know that? I know that because, for example, anytime we look at UMDA data, the Housing and Mortgage Disclosure Act data, right, we see the patterns. And it's clear to us that, this is just, another redlining, but in digital form, right?
Mm-hmm. So. No, I agree with that. And so that brings me to this other question that came up that's not what we had talked about, but you mentioned NAFA versus Facebook. And so when we look at the set of principles and we look at the Facebook, draw for me a picture of the similarities. Is that a good example of the set of principles that was used by Facebook in their algorithm that brought about that case?
Yeah, no. So there are different ways that you look at it. So generally, if you think about a platform, like a recommender platform, right? And that's in my mind how I see a platform where housing advertisement is going on. So I want to believe almost everyone now has Netflix, has Amazon Prime. And when you go on Amazon Prime, right, based on the data or the historical movies that you've watched, right? So you're probably wondering, how does this platform get to know who I am, right? It's just because, well, they've learned your habits and all that. Now, as they learn these habits, of course, there are still some data points that are not visible to them, right? And because of the opacity or lack of clarity in terms of like what they have, they can actually misrepresent something on some of these platforms that may not even apply, right, to individuals. So that's one of the similarities that you see even in Facebook case, where they had these antiquated, outdated algorithms that was actually amplifying well-known segregation patterns, right? Where you can think of it like, let's say, in two buckets. One who are in one geographical region, a group of people in a certain geographical region, they see certain type of housing hacks, right? Just because of their zip code. Mm-hmm. And then in the different region, they don't see the same type of housing hack because the system assumes, for example, this is their net worth, this is their income, and all that, right? So that's, some of the similarities or parallels that one can draw. And in fact, in the US, when we think about these legacy discriminatory policies, the society is so segregated that the data which fuels this algorithmic system is just replicating or amplifying the same patterns, right, created by these legacy discriminatory policies. And that's why in our settlement with Facebook, we had to convince Facebook that you just need to build your system anew. Because if you still want to continue to use your existing system that led you into troubled waters, it's not going to work because these algorithms, they rely on generative system. Generative system here is the system that generates the data. So for as long as you continue to rely on your broken system, similar to like credit score, right? Like here in the US, we have a dual credit problem where people of color, majority of people of color, they get their credit from the fringe market, right? The fringe financial market. And white, they get their credit from the mainstream financial market, right? And when you look at it, so when we talk about the credit reporting agencies, it is only the mainstream players or actors that
That are being
report to
reported.
them.
Yeah.
So because of that dichotomy, right? So even if you have good intention to create a credit scoring system that is accurate to determine somebody's credit worthiness, because the process that is generating the data is broken, there's a limit to what one can do.
All right, so you're going right into my next question, which is what makes a good algorithm?
Well, yeah, that's really a good question in terms of like what makes a good algorithm. It really depends on how you look at it in terms of like a good algorithm. The way I like to, start in terms of like thinking about a good algorithm, I would say it's different from how a typical algorithm developer or a typical data scientist will go about it, right? Because usually they start with the data and then you start thinking about other things, right? But again, because of my experiences growing up, things I've seen in society, because of what I've also seen given my career background, I always say that if you want to think about what makes a good algorithm, the starting point should be the history, right? So one needs to think about the history behind the data. That should be the starting point, right? Like you need to look at data as a representation of real people. And it's not just, like most people would say data is an objective fact, it's objective truth. There are a lot of examples out there that will convince you that no, it's not always like that. It's just what you really want to measure, right? So when we talk about history, in fact, I'll give a real world example. So let's say in housing, right? We talk about affordable housing, right? In America, we have affordable housing crisis. So if we ask an algorithm to address this, of course, like I said, I want that algorithm to start with the history. And what is the history here? The algorithm needs to look into understanding the laws and policies that restrict housing policy. So if one just goes about creating an algorithm without paying attention to understanding what are the constraints, regulatory constraints, understanding the laws and the policies, right? For example, zoning laws, lot size requirements, historical preservation rules. These are all rules that can limit affordable housing options and thereby driving up prices, even leading to segregation. And so these patterns are so ingrained that some algorithms can even predict a person's race based on their last name and where they live. So think about it. If an algorithm can predict my race just because of where I live and my last name, then we have a problem, right?
Yeah.
Because the algorithm is just spinning out what is already in the system. So that's why I always say that it's very, very important to start with the history if you want to have a responsible algorithm. So, for example, we can't expect to benefit from AI without addressing deep-seated issues like the legacy of slavery, Jim Crow laws, and even ongoing racial disparities, right? Because like I always say, AI is not a magician, right? So we can't expect AI to just magically solve problems, right? So if we refuse to start with history, paying attention to the laws, what needs to change so that we can actually have a good algorithm. Now, the next thing I also like to say in terms of like making an algorithm, we just don't build a system and deploy it in housing, in health or education. We also need to think about, is this an algorithm that is controllable controllability is very important, which means we need to have a human in the loop. So in the event that the algorithm makes erroneous decision, there's somebody that is there to actually look into it. There's somebody there to listen to customer concerns or consumer concerns and fix that concerns. If it is related to data quality, erroneous decisions. So that's another thing that makes a good algorithm. And the next thing I like to say is reliability, which means the algorithm needs to be safe. It also needs to be valid. We don't want to deploy an algorithm that will cause harms, right? And again, for algorithm to be really good, it's something that should be explainable. Not only explainable to people who come from a coding background, but it's because we're talking about housing, which is connected to people's lives. So you should be able to also explain it to an ordinary consumer, right? And another thing I like to say is a good algorithm should not abuse people's privacy. So it needs to preserve privacy. Now, when we talk about housing and the need to, to test for discrimination, there are some data that we need that qualify as personal data or personally identifiable data. But the good thing is there are different techniques out there that could also be leveraged to preserve the privacy in the data. And the last thing I like to say to your question about what makes good algorithms is good algorithms do not create discrimination. Good algorithms don't amplify discrimination. Good algorithms don't perpetuate discrimination. So algorithm has to be fair. It has to be equitable. So with all those different elements that I mentioned, the historical context, controllability, reliability, explainability, privacy, and fairness, if we have all that, then we do have a good algorithm.
Excellent. I really appreciate it. Believe it or not, the time has gone so quickly. I have so many more questions that I could ask you, but I appreciate your time. I know that you're out in a conference, and I want to thank you for your time. And just this has been an education. And unfortunately, from what you tell me, I believe that we as a society are not there. I think we're still a little behind in getting the algorithms the way we need to, and to look at the historical context and the controllability and everything else that you mentioned. But I want to thank you once again, Doctor, for being with us on PHRC Speaks.
Thank you for having me, Adrian. It's my pleasure to share my knowledge and also the great work that we're doing here at NAFA. And I hope, the audience have one or two things taken away from the conversation.
Thank you. I also want to thank you, the viewer, for joining us today. For more information on this topic, or if you believe that you've been a victim of discrimination in a housing transaction, visit us online at www.phrc.pa.gov or call us at 717-787-9780. We're also pretty easy to find online on Facebook, X, Instagram, and LinkedIn, speaking of algorithms. That's it for this edition of PHRC Speaks. Until next time, take care, be good, and be fair to each other.
This program has been paid for by the sponsor and does not reflect the views of PCN.